We're going to move into a discussion now around how to frame what responsible digital finance looks like. Let's start with a brief discussion around that framing. I'm going to invite Gerhard Coetzee to come speak with us about some work he's been doing at CGAP to think about this. He's responsible for CGAP's consumer value work, focusing on that regulatory frontier around responsible digital finance and gender-focused guidance for policymakers and regulators. Before joining CGAP, he was at the head of inclusive banking at Absa Bank in South Africa, responsible for digital money, and the founder for the Center for Inclusive Banking in Africa. He's also taught at the University of Pretoria and has a PhD from there as well. So thanks, Gerhard.
I follow on following the footsteps of great speakers this morning, and they already made half my point, so I'll speak for 2 minutes and go and sit down and help Patrick and Jayshree to get the show on the road. No, I'm not that serious about it. So I divided the presentation into 3 parts. First, I just want to tell you what we are doing at CGAP in this area, more in terms of the framework in which we are doing. It will be a minute or so, and then I'll speak about the responsible digital finance ecosystem approach. And then lastly, I'm going to emphasize the fact that we in this room are the co-creators of that approach. This is not only a CGAP game. This is a joint team effort between all of us. And you'll see we'll do the same when we speak in the panel, in our contribution, and then also this afternoon in the Digital Credit Working Group. So the story of this framework didn't start yesterday, and you can see nothing on the screen. It's just to remind me about what I want to tell you. But you can see 2008 on the left-hand side. That is when the CGAP policy group first started thinking about integrity, inclusion, stability, and protection as policy objectives. And in 2008, they added competition as well. So there was a C as well in 2008. At the same time, in that paper, authored by Tim Lyman and David Porteous, and the third author, who I can't remember, my apologies. At the same time, that paper also predicted or stated the 4 basic regulatory enablers for digital financial services. And the funny thing, that paper was called, it's sort of named, but then it says for mobile phones and other similar technology. 2008. I loved it. Fast forward 2012, the ISIP framework was stated. 2018, the ISIP toolkit. After many tests, 2018, we also have the basic regulatory enablers, and that flows into the work that we phrase regulatory architecture at the frontier. Right. The second stream of work was started way before, but I started with 2015, otherwise it will be even more cluttered page. But why I mentioned 2015 is I also want to honor somebody this morning, somebody that was crucial and critical for the Responsible Finance Forum, and she passed away recently. Her name is Kate McKee. And Kate was absolutely instrumental in the creation of the concept of the Responsible Finance Forum. So we honor Kate in this way. Then 2015, that was the first paper on digital finance and consumer protection, right, that Kate and Rafe Mazer and other colleagues put together. 2017, we came up with the customer-centric guide, culminating 4 years of work. And from then onwards, everything we did, we focused on the customer and customer centricity as our anchor, as our departure point. 2019, we started thinking about what comes after customer centricity as a voluntary action by financial service providers, because you can convince them it's a good business for you, here are the business cases, we published that, but it's still voluntary. And then we started thinking about the concept of customer outcomes-driven regulation, right? So that's in the market conduct space that unfolds, and we designed outcomes. We trawled the international arena for indicators. We didn't create one indicator in the beginning. We got it all from research, and that's where the thinking started. And then Juan Carlos Izaguirre authored or led a team that published Making Consumer Protection Regulation More Customer-Centric in 2020. And then Eric Duflo and myself came up with the notion around this ecosystem. But come on, let's be honest, it's a no-brainer. It's not as if we sat deeply for hours and days and worked on it. Eric looked at me one day and said, Gerhard, I penciled this framework together, what do you think? And I said, Eric, I think it's wonderful. It's a culmination of everybody here's ideas. So that's where it comes from, the responsible digital finance ecosystem. And those together form the backbone of fostering a responsible, enabling ecosystem, which is our outcome area for CGAP's policy unit. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, let's run through this. So we all heard this morning from Mr. Sharkar, from Michael, from Pawan, from the Queen, that we have this avalanche of technology hitting us. So innovations are transforming the financial sector landscape. And that's in technologies, sort of emerging technologies, new products and services, new providers, and new business models. And it challenged policymakers. We've heard it. I'm just quickly summarizing. The first question we ask ourselves is, who regulates what nowadays? Right. The second question is, how can regulators, financial and non-financial, collaborate more? Because we don't see that collaboration happening. And the third question is, how do we balance these policy objectives of ISIP plus E? And finally, how do we balance innovations and protection in the market? Okay, we've all heard it this morning, I'm repeating. That leads us to asking the same question, but now looking at the explosion of digital transactions and the reality of a faster increasing fallout than we have an increase proportionally in digital transactions. And Paul Adams mentioned the Uganda survey, the 90% of people finding it difficult to actually transact digitally, some sort of problem in the process or whatever. We just finished 2 further surveys in Côte d'Ivoire and in Senegal, and we get to the same numbers. Up to 80% of people finding some difficulty while doing a transaction, etc. But then the real problem, up to 40% of people losing money in the process. Those are big, big numbers. So we need this new approach where we have many more actors, many more regulators, many more products and services, and many more risks, and we can't run it just as a financial sector focused, anchored, siloed approach anymore. We have to look wider, but we have to anchor it in the financial sector, and that is where we come up with the responsible digital finance ecosystem, and that's our first attempt at a definition. And we already think the definition is wrong, but I'm leaving it to you in the discussions to tell us what's wrong in that definition, what can we improve. But it is holistic. It looks far wider than normal. It means that all key actors in the finance ecosystem needs to be recognized and listened to and collaborate. We'll get to that just now. Consumers, providers, policymakers, market facilitators. And we emphasize this concept of positive outcomes for customers. And we emphasize that we have to double down on ensuring it for women and for vulnerable customers, excluded areas, rural, excluded groups. So this is our first attempt. And you can see where we are going with this, because the reality is that if we ignore actors in this ecosystem and we do not pull them into this room and on the journey with us, we are not going to be able to do this in a holistic way. So I've already covered the key actors, and if you look at this diagram, it is reflected in the paper that was shared for pre-reading. But there are three elements here that are so important: the customer centricity, the collaboration, and the capacity of these actors to participate. And we at first call those preconditions, but we are not sure about that word anymore. So help us find the right concepts here. If you think about customer centricity, that is definitely an anchor, and we are quite adamant about that one. That is a condition or a precondition or an approach that we have to anchor our work with. And you'll see it in the CGAP work on market monitoring tools, on consumer or customer councils used by regulators. We are really doubling down on that. And you'll see customer centricity going through all the CGAP work now after we've established it as an anchor point. But customer centricity for providers is focusing on how providers operate in a whole strategic ecosystem with the customer as the anchor. Customer centricity for policymakers is, let's just start listening to the customers, policymakers. Let's start listening to the people. Let's go and hear what they have to say. Recently, I was in a session around ombuds in South Africa, and we realized after looking at the data that there is no poor customer using an ombud, because the system is not created in a way that provides them access or in a way that provides them the means to communicate with the ombud. It's as if we do not think about the segmentation of the market when we are regulators. So we have to change that around, right? Funders, I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but the same principle applies. Capability, on the consumer side, we heard this morning, digital literacy, so powerfully important. On the provider side, what is the capability of understanding this? We have SPTF and people with certification in this area. We've got the GSMA code that we referred to this morning. Policymakers, bringing customers center to their thinking around policymaking, and the same for market facilitators. Collaboration, now we are thinking about the telecoms regulator, a data protector, conduct regulators, prudential regulators, and how do we get people to speak across? And we have examples here. I don't want to go into the examples. You're going to get the slide. But we've got brilliant examples of this collaboration happening in select countries in the world. So how do we monitor progress in this responsible digital finance ecosystem? And we emphasize the concept of measurement strongly. And there are many ways in which you can measure. One of the recent publications from CGAP, and I know some of the institutions in the room are working on that as well, the VARA definitely, is around looking at social media analysis as a way of measuring, what people say. But even there, you're missing the real poor and the real excluded. So we have to find ways of measurement that includes. And the customer intermediate outcomes measurement is one way to do that, but it's not been proven to work across the world. We've got 2 or 3 or 4 case studies, and there we need collaboration to expand the learning of how you would do that. So it brings me to the end of my intervention, and this is a call to action for all of us. Help us with this work in progress. Firstly, we have to build the RDFE as a framework to apply in countries, as a framework to steer us in terms of how do you go from where you are in a jurisdiction to having a responsible digital finance ecosystem. Maybe this framework is a function of the policy objectives that I've stated, ISIP plus C, preconditions, customer centricity, processes, collaboration and capacity building, measured, and my question to you is, what else? So over to Ahmed Dermish and my colleagues. I told you I'm going to save time, and let's go for this discussion. Kartik, are you going to introduce?
I'm going to say
Okay.
just a couple of things.
Very good.